The smell of stale coffee and fried onions was the perfume of her life. Chloe wiped down the sticky red vinyl of the booth, her movements economical, practiced. 18 years old, and she moved like a woman of 40, worn smooth by the relentless friction of other people's needs. The Starlight Diner was a bubble of buzzing fluorescent light in the encroaching dark of the city, and tonight, it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. "Hey, sweetheart. Another coffee over here." Chloe didn't turn. She knew the voice. Mark. He and his two shadows had been nursing the same cold cups for 2 hours, their laughter always a half-second too loud, their eyes lingering on her like a stain. She grabbed the glass pot from the burner, the heat of familiar comfort against her palm. "Here you go," she said, her voice flat as she filled his mug. Her uniform, a dark red dress that had seen better days and a starched white apron, felt flimsy under his gaze. "Smile a little, Chloe. It's not that bad." Mark smirked, his friend snickering beside him. "I'll smile when you pay your check," she replied, turning away before he could see the tremor in her hands. Competence was her armor. Don't let them see you sweat. Don't let them see you're scared. It was a mantra she'd learned early. An hour later, they finally left, dropping a few crumpled bills on the table that barely covered the cost of their coffee. Chloe swept the money into her apron pocket, relief washing over her so intensely it made her dizzy. She finished her closing duties, mopping the checkered floor until the black and white tiles gleamed, the scent of bleach finally overpowering the grease. The back alley was a shortcut, a jagged breath of cold, damp air between the overheated diner and the bus stop. It smelled of wet cardboard and rot. She clutched the strap of her worn backpack, her footsteps echoing off the grimy brick walls. She should have gone out the front. She knew it. A primal instinct screamed at her to turn back. But she was tired, and tired people make mistakes. They were waiting for her halfway down the narrow passage. Mark and his friends, their forms blocking the dim light from the street. "Look what we have here," Mark drawled, stepping forward. "Little miss too good to smile." Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a shrinking cage. She took a step back. "Leave me alone, Mark. We just want to talk," he said, but his eyes were glittering with a viciousness that had nothing to do with conversation. The world dissolved into a blur of motion and pain. A shove against the brick wall scraped her cheek raw. A fist connected with her stomach, stealing the air from her lungs in a brutal gasp. She crumpled, her backpack skittering across the filthy asphalt. They kicked her. She curled into a ball, trying to protect her head, the worn fabric of her red dress tearing under the assault. Every impact was a sickening thud, a starburst of agony that echoed through her bones. Then, as quickly as it began, it was over. "That'll teach you some respect," Mark spat, his voice sounding distant. Footsteps faded, followed by mocking laughter that bounced off the walls and faded into the city's hum. Silence. Chloe lay there, pressed against the cold, damp wall. Every part of her ached with a deep, throbbing rhythm. She tried to push herself up, but a searing pain shot through her ankle, and she fell back with a choked cry. It was broken, or twisted. She couldn't tell. All she knew was that she couldn't put any weight on it. Rain began to fall, a cold, miserable drizzle that plastered her hair to her face and soaked through her torn dress. She was just another piece of trash left in an alley. That was when the headlights cut through the darkness. A long, black car, silent as a shark, slid to a stop at the mouth of the alley. Its engine didn't make a sound. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the back door opened. A man stepped out. He was a silhouette at first, framed by the car's interior light. Then he moved into the alley's gloom, and details emerged with chilling clarity. He wore a suit, not just a suit, but a piece of tailored armor. It was a deep charcoal gray, a Tom Ford by the cut of it, fitting his broad shoulders and narrow waist perfectly. His shoes were black leather, polished to a mirror shine, and they made no sound on the wet ground. He moved with an unnatural stillness, a predatory grace that made the air itself seem to hold its breath. He stopped a few feet from her. Chloe could see his face now, cast in the dim glow from the street. He was Japanese, his features sharp and severe, carved from stone. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb the light around them. A single, thin scar cut through his left eyebrow, a pale white line against his skin. His black hair was slicked back, not a strand out of place. He didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her with an unnerving, analytical calm, as if she were a problem to be solved. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of her pain. This was a different kind of danger. Mark and his friends were brutal and stupid. This man was lethal. It was in the way he stood, the absolute and unshakable control in his posture. He took another step closer. She flinched, trying to press herself further into the wall. A pathetic whimper escaped her lips. "Please," she whispered, her voice raw and broken. "Please don't hurt me." Her gaze dropped to her useless leg, tears blurring her vision. "I can't walk." The man said nothing. He simply watched her, his dark eyes missing nothing, the torn dress, the blood on her lip, the raw terror in her expression. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the sound of the rain and her own ragged breathing. She thought he would turn and leave. Or worse. Instead, he knelt. He moved with a fluid precision that was mesmerizing. The expensive fabric of his trousers settled on the filthy ground without a whisper of protest. He reached out, not toward her face or her body, but to a strand of wet hair that had stuck to her cheek. With an almost surgical delicacy, his long fingers brushed it away. His touch was shockingly gentle, the calloused tip of his thumb barely grazing her skin. It was over in a second. Then he stood, turning his head slightly to speak to someone still in the car. His voice was low, a quiet rumble that carried an unmistakable weight of command. "Satoshi, open the door." He turned back to her. Before she could process what was happening, he slid one arm beneath her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her as if she weighed nothing at all. A gasp of pain escaped her as her body protested, but his hold was firm, secure. Her head fell against his chest, and she was enveloped in the scent of him, expensive wool, clean rain, and a faint, intoxicating trace of cedarwood and smoke. It was the scent of power. He carried her out of the alley, out of the rain and the filth, and placed her carefully onto the plush leather of the back seat. The door closed with a heavy, final thud, sealing her inside the silent, opulent world of the car. He slid in beside her, his presence filling the space, making it hard to breathe. He didn't look at her again. He simply stared forward as the car pulled away from the curb, leaving the alley and her old life behind. Chloe stared at his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the unreadable expression in his eyes reflected in the window. The city lights streaked past, a watercolor blur of red and gold. She was trapped. She was in more danger now than she had ever been in her life. But as the warmth of the car began to seep into her chilled bones, and the world outside faded into a dark dream, the last thing she felt before consciousness slipped away was the phantom sensation of his gentle touch on her cheek. And that terrified her more than anything. She woke up to the color white. White walls, white ceiling, and white silk sheets that felt impossibly soft against her skin. A quiet beeping sound came from somewhere to her left. She turned her head, wincing at the pull of sore muscles. An 4-line was taped to the back of her hand, snaking up to a clear bag on a metal stand. Her torn diner dress was gone, replaced by a simple, soft black t-shirt and loose cotton pants. Her ankle was professionally wrapped, elevated on a pillow. It still ached, but the sharp, searing pain had been reduced to a dull, manageable throb. "It is good to see you are awake." The voice was calm and polite. A man in his late 50s stood near the window, his back ramrod straight. He was also Japanese, with graying hair at his temples and kind eyes that held a hint of weariness. He wore a simple black suit, less ostentatious than the one her rescuer had worn, but no less immaculate. "Where am I?" Chloe asked, her voice raspy. "You are in the home of Mr. Ishikawa. You are his guest," the man replied. He gestured to her ankle. The doctor has seen to you. A clean break. It will heal in 6 to 8 weeks, provided you do not put weight on it. Mr. Ishikawa. The man from the alley. Takahiro Ishikawa. The name settled in her mind, heavy and foreboding. Why? She asked, the single word encompassing a dozen questions. Why me? Why bring me here? What do you want? The older man, who introduced himself as Satoshi, gave a slight bow. Mr. Ishikawa does not tolerate disorder in his territory. What happened to you was disorderly. He has corrected the situation. Corrected it? The young men who assaulted you will not trouble anyone again, Satoshi said, his tone leaving no room for doubt about the finality of that statement. A chill went down Chloe's spine. This wasn't just a rich man. This was something else entirely. Something dangerous. The next few days passed in a haze of pain medication and dreamlike stillness. The room was a luxurious prison. The windows overlooked a meticulously raked Zen garden, complete with a koi pond and a weeping cherry tree. It was beautiful and sterile. She was brought meals on black lacquer trays, simple, elegant dishes of rice, fish, and vegetables that were more nourishing than anything she had ever eaten. Satoshi was her primary point of contact, always polite, always formal, but his eyes held a story of loyalty and violence she was only beginning to understand. Of Takahiro Ishikawa, she saw nothing. Yet his presence was everywhere, in the silent efficiency of the household staff, in the palpable tension that hummed beneath the serene surface of the mansion, in the way Satoshi always referred to him with a reverence bordering on fear. On the 4th day, restless and tired of her confinement, Chloe used the crutches the doctor had left her to explore. The hallway outside her room was long and lined with dark wood. The air was cool and still. She moved slowly, her ears straining for any sound. She passed several closed doors before finding one slightly ajar. Peeking inside, she saw it was a study. The room was a stark contrast to the rest of the house. It was Western in style, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive mahogany desk, and 2 leather armchairs facing a cold, black marble fireplace. And on the mantelpiece, there was a single, framed photograph. Drawn by a force she couldn't name, Chloe hobbled into the room. The photo was of a younger Takahiro. He was smiling, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his severe features into something handsome and almost boyish. His arm was around a young woman with the same dark eyes and high cheekbones. She was laughing, her head thrown back in joy. They looked happy, carefree. Her name was Akemi. Chloe jumped, nearly losing her balance. Satoshi was standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. She was his younger sister, he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. She was everything to him, his only family after their parents died. What happened to her? Chloe asked, her voice a whisper. Satoshi's gaze grew distant, lost in a memory that was clearly painful. There are other families in the city, rivals. The Sato clan. They thought to use her as leverage against him. To force him to give up territory, he paused, his jaw tightening. They miscalculated. They did not understand his honor. But he was too late. He could not protect her.
Shame.
The shame he carries for something he could not prevent. The prompt's words echoed in her mind. This was his wound. The source of the cold stillness he wore like a shroud. He found you in that alley, Satoshi continued, his eyes meeting hers. Broken and helpless. Perhaps it reminded him of his failure. Perhaps he simply saw a wrong that he had the power to right. With my master, the reasons are often his own. Later that evening, the danger Satoshi had hinted at became terrifyingly real. A sudden, deafening explosion from the front of the property rattled the windows. Chloe cried out as the house was plunged into darkness, the emergency lights kicking in a moment later with a faint, red glow. Shouts echoed from downstairs. Satoshi burst into her room. Stay here. Do not move from this room. His face was grim, the kind weariness replaced by the sharp focus of a soldier. But Chloe couldn't stay put. Adrenaline surged through her. She crept to the door, peering down the long hallway. Men in dark suits, guns drawn, were moving with silent, coordinated efficiency toward the front of the house. She saw Takahiro at the center of them, issuing quiet commands. He was a general in his element, his face a mask of cold fury. He moved through the violence like it was a language he was born speaking. An hour later, the power was restored. Satoshi returned, a small cut on his cheek the only sign of the chaos. "A car bomb at the main gate," he explained curtly. "A message from the Sato family. They are growing bold." The next day, Chloe found her chance. During the morning shift change of the guards posted around the property, she noticed a small service gate in the garden wall was left unattended for a few minutes. It was her opportunity to escape. She could hobble out, find a payphone, call the police. She could disappear back into the world, back to her anonymous life. She stood by the window, her hand on the latch, her heart pounding. She looked out at the gate, then back at the sterile, silent opulence of her room. Outside was a world where boys like Mark could beat a girl in an alley for sport and face no consequences. A world where she was alone and invisible. Here she was a prisoner, yes, but she was also seen, protected, in a way that was as terrifying as it was seductive. She thought of Akemi. She thought of the raw pain hidden beneath Satoshi's formal demeanor and the crushing weight of shame that drove the master of the house. She made a deliberate choice. She let her hand fall from the window latch and turned away from the gate. She would not run. Not yet. Takahiro found her in the garden later that afternoon. She was sitting on a stone bench by the koi pond, watching the vibrant orange and white fish glide through the dark water. He approached so silently she didn't notice him until his shadow fell over her. He didn't sit. He stood before her, his hands clasped behind his back. The perfect charcoal suit was gone, replaced by simple black trousers and a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. For the first time, she saw the ink. Intricate, traditional tattoos, a dragon's coils, swirling water, and lotus blossoms covered his arms, disappearing under the white cotton of his sleeves. "Satoshi told me the garden gate was left open this morning," he said. His voice was a low baritone, calm and devoid of inflection. It was the first time he had spoken to her directly since the alley. "I know," she replied, not looking at him. "You did not leave." It was a statement, not a question. "No." "Why?" Chloe finally looked up, meeting his dark, intense gaze. His eyes were like polished obsidian, revealing nothing. "Where would I go?" she asked, her voice stronger than she expected. "Back to the diner? Back to that alley? Your man said you corrected the problem. What happens when another problem comes along? Who corrects that one?" A flicker of something, surprise? Respect, passed through his eyes, so fleeting she thought she might have imagined it. He stared at her for a long moment, the silence between them stretching, filled with the gentle sound of the water feature and the weight of everything unspoken. The silence was not empty. It was charged, alive with a tension that made the air feel thick. He was seeing her, truly seeing her, not as a victim or a charity case, but as something else. Something different from everyone else in his world. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Then he turned and walked away, leaving her with the lingering scent of cedarwood and the unsettling feeling that she had just crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The war between them was tested the following week. He began to bring her with him, not to meetings of violence, but to the quiet, controlled centers of his power. A traditional tea house in the city's Japantown, where old men in kimonos bowed to him not just out of respect, but out of fear. A high-end art gallery where he conducted a silent transaction for a painting, his presence alone enough to cut the price in half. She was a ghost at his side, a silent observer on crutches. He never explained who she was. He never had to. His possession of her was absolute and unspoken. It was in one of these places, a private restaurant where the owner cleared a room for him, that she saw the true nature of his world. A lieutenant was delivering a report, his head bowed. The man was sweating, his words stumbling. Takahiro listened, his face impassive, his fingers steepled before him. He asked a single, quiet question. The man lied. Chloe saw the shift in Takahiro's eyes before he moved. It was a subtle hardening, a chilling focus. He didn't raise his voice.
He didn't stand.
He simply reached across the table and took the man's hand. With a calm, deliberate pressure, he bent the man's index finger back until a sickening crack echoed in the silent room. The man screamed, a choked, strangled sound, but didn't pull away. Takahiro released him. "Tell me again," he said, his voice as soft as silk. The man, cradling his broken finger, told the truth. Chloe sat frozen, her blood running cold. This was who he was. Not a savior, not a wounded hero. A monster who broke people as easily as he breathed. This was the moment that should have made her run screaming. But she didn't. She watched him, horrified and fascinated in equal measure. She saw the absolute control, the brutal necessity of his actions in a world where a single lie could get you killed. She was discovering something dark within herself, an understanding, a tolerance for this violence that scared her more than the violence itself. Her old world tried to pull her back. Her boss from the diner, a nervous man named Mr. Henderson, started getting visits from men with Sato clan tattoos. They wanted to know about the girl who disappeared from the alley. They wanted to know who took her. Satoshi sources reported that Henderson was close to breaking. Chloe knew Henderson. Knew he kept a secret ledger in his office, a record of the off-the-books cash payments he made to his undocumented kitchen staff. It was his greatest fear, being reported to the authorities. That night, she used the burner phone Satoshi had given her for emergencies. She made an anonymous call to Henderson. She didn't threaten him. She simply said, "I hear immigration is making surprise inspections this week. Be a shame if someone's books weren't in order." Then she hung up. It was a morally gray act, a step across a line she could never uncross. She had used fear as a weapon. She had protected Takahiro's secret. She had chosen a side. When Satoshi informed her the next day that Mr. Henderson had suddenly developed amnesia regarding his former waitress, he looked at her with new eyes. He saw the steel beneath her quiet exterior. The Sato clan, frustrated, grew desperate. They arranged a meeting, a supposed truce, at a neutral location. Takahiro knew it was a trap, but honor dictated he attend. He went with only Satoshi and 2 other men. Chloe waited in the mansion, the silence pressing in on her. Hours passed. Each tick of the clock was a hammer blow against her nerves. Finally, the black car returned. It was riddled with bullet holes. Satoshi helped Takahiro out of the car. He was bleeding from a deep gash on his forearm, his white shirt stained crimson. Panic, sharp and fierce, seized Chloe. She pushed past Satoshi. "Get the medical kit.
Now."
She led Takahiro to the study, her own limp forgotten. She forced him into one of the leather armchairs. His men hovered at the door, but he waved them away with a flick of his uninjured hand. They were alone. "It is just a scratch," he said, his voice tight with pain. "It's not a scratch," she countered, her hands surprisingly steady as she cut away the bloody fabric of his sleeve. "It's deep. It needs stitches." Using the supplies Satoshi brought, she cleaned the wound with an antiseptic that made him hiss. She worked with a focus she didn't know she possessed, her diner first aid training kicking in. As she prepared the suture needle, her face was close to his. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin, smell the metallic tang of his blood mixed with the familiar scent of cedarwood. He was watching her, his dark eyes intense, tracking her every movement. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pushed the needle through his skin for the first stitch. He didn't flinch. "You are not afraid," he stated, his voice a low rumble. "I am," she admitted, not looking up from her work. "But my hands are steady." She finished the last stitch, her movements clean and efficient. As she reached for the bandage, he caught her wrist. His grip was strong, his callous thumb pressing against her pulse point. Her breath hitched. "No one has touched me without permission in 15 years, he said, his voice raw. "No one has looked at me without fear for a decade," he paused, his gaze burning into hers. "Except you." It wasn't a declaration of love. It was something far more dangerous. A confession of the profound, unsettling effect she had on him. He was the most powerful man she had ever met, a king in his own brutal empire, and in that moment, he was utterly vulnerable to her. The tension between them was a physical thing, a crackling energy that left no room for air.
He slowly released her wrist.
But the connection was made. A line had been crossed. The Sato clan's failure to kill him only inflamed their rage. If they couldn't get to the dragon, they would target his treasure. They had seen her with him. They had seen the way he watched her. They saw a weakness. 2 nights later, Chloe was in the garden, unable to sleep. The moon was full, casting a silver light over the raked gravel and dark water of the pond. A cool breeze rustled the leaves of the cherry tree. She felt a prickle on the back of her neck, the primal instinct that had failed her in the alley screaming at her now. She turned. A figure dressed entirely in black dropped from the branch of the tree, landing silently on the grass. He held a short, wicked-looking blade. An assassin. He wasn't there for Takahiro. He was there for her. He lunged. Chloe scrambled back, her crutch clattering on the stone path. She wasn't a fighter, but she was a survivor. She grabbed a heavy ceramic pot filled with soil and hurled it at him. He dodged it easily, but it bought her a second. She screamed, a raw, piercing sound meant to raise the alarm. He was on her in an instant, one hand clamping over her mouth, the other pressing the cold steel of the blade against her throat. Silence, he hissed. Lights flashed on all over the mansion. Doors burst open. Takahiro appeared on the veranda, Satoshi and his men fanning out behind him. They stopped dead when they saw the blade at Chloe's throat. Stand down, Ishikawa, the assassin snarled. Or she dies. Takahiro stood perfectly still, his face an unreadable mask, but Chloe could see the fury coiling in his shoulders, the lethal intent in his eyes. He was calculating, weighing his options. In that terrifying, suspended moment, Chloe's mind raced. She could see the assassin's reflection in the dark water of the koi pond behind him. She saw his stance, how his weight was distributed. It was a risk. A terrible, stupid risk. But waiting to be rescued was not an option. She drove her heel down, hard, onto the assassin's instep. He grunted in pain, his grip on her faltering for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. With every ounce of her strength, she rammed her elbow backward into his solar plexus. The air whooshed out of him. His arm loosened. She ripped herself free, stumbling and falling to the ground, scrambling away from him on the wet grass. That split second of her own decisive action was the only opening Takahiro needed. He didn't hesitate. He moved like a blur of black lightning, closing the distance between the veranda and the assassin in what seemed like a single, fluid motion. There was a brief, brutal flurry of movement, a glint of steel from a knife that appeared in Takahiro's hand as if from nowhere. The fight was over before the assassin's body hit the ground. Silence descended on the garden, broken only by Chloe's ragged breaths. Takahiro didn't look at the body. He didn't look at his men. He walked directly to her, his eyes fixed on her face. He knelt in front of her, ignoring the blood and the wet grass. His hands, large and warm, came up to frame her face, his thumbs gently brushing away her tears. He checked her neck for any cuts, his touch impossibly tender. He looked at her, and for the first time, the mask was completely gone. In his dark eyes, she saw a fierce, terrifying possessiveness, and something else, a raw, aching relief. He said her name. Chloe. It sounded different than anyone else had ever said it. It sounded like a vow, like a claim. They will never touch you again, he said, his voice low and absolute. You are under my protection, he paused, his gaze holding hers captive. You are mine. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a truth that settled deep in her bones. The cost of that truth was her old life, the simple, anonymous world of the Starlight Diner, now gone forever, a ghost of a memory. The cost for him was a vulnerability, a weakness his enemies now knew by name.
He had chosen to accept that risk.
For her. Later, She stood on the balcony of his study, overlooking the glittering sprawl of the city. Her city, but not her world. Not anymore. The night air was cool, and she wrapped her arms around herself. A life for a life. Her quiet, predictable existence had been traded for this, a gilded cage ruled by a beautiful monster. She heard him approach from behind.
He didn't speak.
He simply took off his heavy suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm from his body and enveloped her in that familiar, dangerous scent of cedarwood and smoke. It was a weight, a burden, and a shield all at once. She didn't flinch from his closeness. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned back, just slightly, until her back rested against his solid chest. His presence was a silent promise of violence and safety, intertwined and inseparable. Down below, the city lights twinkled like fallen stars, a world away. This was not a fairy tale. It was not a story of rescue. It was a choice, made in the shadows, to stay with the darkness that had saved her from the dark.